I work mainly on refugees, people who are forced to flee because of a well-founded fear of persecution and cross an international border. Refugees are often characterised as human rights abuses made visible, and the traditional drivers of cross-border displacement are authoritarian regimes and wars and conflict. But today we see new drivers of displacement: climate change, fragile states, food and water insecurity, and we see rising numbers of people being displaced. Today there are over 100 million people displaced, and around a third of them are refugees according to international law. There's also declining political willingness to host and protect refugees, and the reasons for that are enmeshed as well in broader global trends. As we see deindustrialization, automation, the collapse of traditional employment sectors, that's intertwined with attitudes towards asylum and immigration that shape the politics of many of these questions. So one of the primary areas of my current research is around the economic lives and contributions of refugees. And really that's a reflection on the fact that the traditional humanitarian model involves providing indefinite aid, food, water, shelter to refugees in refugee camps or sometimes urban areas. But actually, many refugees not only have vulnerabilities, but also capacities, capabilities, the ability to make a contribution. So we're rethinking what refugee assistance looks like from just being a humanitarian issue towards being a development challenge, where with the right policies and approaches, we can give refugees the opportunity to work through employment, access to better education, and in turn opportunities for self-reliance and the ability to support themselves and their families wherever possible. So really that's a reflection on this context of rising numbers and needs, declining political will, and how we can square that circle if we create the right evidence-based opportunities to include refugees in societies and in socioeconomic opportunities. A lot of our research focuses on East Africa. We're working in Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. And as part of the Refugee Economies programme that I run, we've collected both qualitative and quantitative data where we follow refugees over time and look at their economic impact, the conditions that enable them to thrive. And we found that variation in welfare outcomes for refugees is significantly related to their access to employment opportunities and their access to education, for instance. We've also looked at the question of social cohesion. When are refugees welcomed by host communities? What shapes host communities' attitudes in receiving societies? And we found, for instance, that one factor is contact. When refugees are able to interact with host communities' attitudes are more likely to be positive, particularly when that's based on business interactions, employment relationships, for instance. I think it's really important that research has an impact on policy and practice. And we try to ensure that our work is widely disseminated to UN organisations, governments, NGOs, and importantly also refugee-led organisations. I've recently presented some of our work on the economic lives of refugees at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, trying to highlight ways in which governments and businesses can support employment opportunities for refugees. And while at the meeting, I facilitated a meeting of the Refugee Employment Network that's trying to support a new pledge under the Global Refugee Forum to support 1 million jobs for refugees. In our work as a team, we've been very lucky to receive recognition for some of our impact work. We received the Economic and Social Research Council's Outstanding International Impact Award for work that's led directly to new funding lines and political recognition for refugee-led organisations, humanitarian organisations led by refugees themselves, that at the front line are effectively and efficiently delivering vocational training, informal education, health support and basic welfare services, including food aid during the pandemic, for instance. In my work, I've developed the concept of survival migration, which is really looking at people who are forced to flee across borders, but fall outside the dominant legal interpretation of who is a refugee. I think looking forwards, that's going to become an increasing challenge in terms of humanitarian and development response. And I'm keen to couple that work on survival migration with some of the work we've done on the economic lives of refugees to think about how we can create sustainable economic opportunities for people who are fleeing for a variety of reasons that fall under that idea of survival migration, whether from Venezuela, or from the Northern Triangle, or from fragile states across sub-Saharan Africa, for instance. I'm also really keen to rethink how we do research within refugee studies, but also in development studies. One of the programs that we've developed is called the Refugee-Led Research Hub, and it's trying to ensure that the people who do research on forced displacement are not just white, middle-aged men like me, but actually people with lived experience of displacement, where they can develop the research skills with support, facilitation, mentorship from Oxford, but they can lead at every stage of the research process, identifying the agendas that matter to them, designing research questions, collecting the data, publishing in their own names, and disseminating in a way that can have impact. So I think there's a new way in which we can think about what participatory research is and means, who does that research, and the role that institutions like Oxford and ODID can play in that process.